Just give you a quick update about Ezra. For those of you who've been praying and haven't heard, he is off of his breathing tube now, which is a great praise, and he's breathing on his own. He's doing better. They're hoping to be able to bring him home either tomorrow or Tuesday. So keep praying that they just want to make sure that he's stable enough and to go home and that he keeps making progress. So keep praying for him. Zach might be able to come up here later and give you a little bit more details at the end of the service. Hey, about 20 years ago, I thought, hey, our family needs a hobby. And so what we decided to do as a hobby is, and my boys were younger, they were like around 8-ish years old, is we decided to get some four-wheelers, some ATVs, and we would go a couple times a year up to Black River Falls area in Wisconsin, and we would ride these ATVs through the woods, and we had all kinds of really exciting and interesting experiences as we went on our ATV adventures. Well, the last time we all went together was about 2015, and then life schedules and stuff didn't really allow for it anymore. We sold our four-wheelers. But on our very last trip together, we had a little bit of an incident, and it was a little bit of a miscommunication problem. And so we were beginning to go down this trail, and, if you ever rode an ATV, you like to go as fast as possible and zoom off. And so we began to go down the direction I thought we were going down the trail. Well, as we started zooming up and ramping up the speed, all of a sudden at the last minute, one of my sons in front of me decided to do this zoom, wheelie around and started coming straight at me. And I didn't have enough time to really get out of the way, and so I was trying to steer out of the way, and I clipped him. And as I clipped him, I kind of clipped the backside of him, and it knocked me off the four-wheeler, and my left leg got stuck under the wheel. And so my natural tendency was to hang on for dear life, but then as I was hanging on, my leg was under the wheel, and the wheel's spinning, and I kind of was in a daze for a moment, and on top of that, I started pressing the throttle because I'm holding on for dear life, pressing the throttle, going faster. My leg's under. I'm heading for the trees, and then all of a sudden I thought, I've got to let go, or I'm going to hit these trees. So I let go. I hit the trees, and of course, one of my kids decided that this all needed to be documented on video. As I'm laying there in pain, I just want to show you a quick video clip of right after this happened, what it looked like. So go ahead and play that.
Do you think it's broken?
So the volume wasn't up very loud, but I was moaning there in pain. Do you think it's broken? I thought, I'm like, oh, it's probably just sprained. So I did come find out that, that little bone that's on the bottom of your ankle had broken off. And so I ended up having to get surgery, and I have a couple permanent screws in there. And my wife always, about once a year, this video comes up, and everyone likes to say, oh, Dad, you don't have a very high pain threshold. My wife is always like, you could never have a baby. I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, to be fair, she's never broken anything, and I've never had a baby. So I think it could be equal amount of pain. I don't know. So one thing that I always say is, if I'm going to get injured, if I'm going to have an injury, I'd like to get injured doing something I enjoy, something fun, right? And maybe even something a little bit risky. And I think, maybe I'm not right on this, but I think that people who do some kind of risky activities in their life, oftentimes they have more joyful lives. Maybe that's not true. Maybe, I don't do a lot of edgy things, but I like to go like skiing and ATV riding, and I've never done parachuting yet, but I don't know if I want to do that or not. But I think the same thing is true of those of us who are in relationships and we're willing to forgive people in those failed relationships, is that the depth of love that we have for someone and the risk that we're willing to take to forgive someone when they hurt us, forgive someone when they offend us, is related to the level of joy that we're going to have in our life. And I think that people who aren't willing to forgive people when they fail don't have the same level of joy that those who are willing to take that risk of forgiveness. And I think that can bring like this next level joy in our lives when we're willing to forgive. And that's what we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of you have heard of Muhammad Ali, and he's a boxer that was real famous and back in the, 70s, 80s, sometime around then. And there was one time that he was on a plane, and it was a public airplane, and the plane was about ready to take off. And you know how the flight attendants go around and tell people, you got to fasten your seatbelt. You got to fasten your seatbelt. Well, he didn't want to fasten his seatbelt. So flight attendant tells him, you need to fasten your seatbelt. And he says, Superman don't need no seatbelt. And the flight attendant says, well, Superman don't need no airplane. You need to fasten your seatbelt. And I think that the reality is this. None of us are Superman or any kind of superhero when it comes to being able to avoid conflicts in our relationships or even in our ability to love and forgive in an easy way. It takes hard work and it takes effort. And, it might be in your marriage relationship, it might be a parent, it might be a child, it might be someone you work with, someone at church, someone at school, if you're a student. All of us have relationships around us where we have to work. We're going to get hurt, we're going to get offended, we're going to have difficulties, and we have to learn how to forgive people. Jesus said this, he said, in this life, you will have trouble. In this life, you will, and part of that trouble means we're going to have trouble in our relationships. But we can overcome that trouble. We can overcome the troubles that we have in our relationships when we can learn how to follow the outline that Jesus and God gives us in the Bible, and when we approach these relationships in a biblical way. So we've been doing this series called Everybody Always, and we've been talking about how do we love people in the best way. The first week we talked about how do we love people where they're at. The second week we talked about how do we love people with your words. And today we're going to talk about how do we love people through failure. And I believe this. Hopefully at the end of this today, you're going to agree with this statement. Failure plus forgiveness equals the ability to love like you've never been hurt. And I'm sure all of us in this room have had hurts that we've experienced, and we've had difficulties with forgiveness. And I would argue that true biblical forgiveness is one of the hardest acts of love. Is that a sneeze? Bless you. True, real biblical forgiveness is one of the hardest acts of love that we ever have to do as humans on this earth. And if you wonder, where does the Bible talk about love? And it's really all throughout, or where does the Bible talk about forgiveness as being part of love? And it's really all throughout the Bible, but there's a couple, Peter, who was one of Jesus' close followers and closest friends, and he was describing what it means to be a Christ follower. And he said this, this is in 1 Peter chapter 4, he's describing what a true Christ follower is. And he says, well, a true Christ follower is you're going to stop chasing your own desires and you're going to start chasing God's desires for you. And he says, you need to stop doing evil things like immorality, lusting, feasting, drunkenness, wild parties. And he says, if you're a true Christ follower, you're going to expect that you can expect that your friends are going to slander you because of the change in your life. And then he uses this big word. He says, therefore, now that you know these things, therefore you need to do two things. He says, pray often. And then he says this, most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other. And then here it is. This is a great description of forgiveness. For love covers a multitude of sin. And you can't cover a multitude of sin without forgiveness. Jesus, when he was on the cross, he made 7 statements on the cross. And you know the very first statement he made while he was dying for our sin is he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So what I want to talk about the rest of today is 3 steps to real, true biblical forgiveness that we can do. The first one is this. 1, if I want to have real biblical forgiveness, I need to release my desire to get even. I need to release my desire to get even. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 12. He says, never avenge yourself. Leave that to God. For he has said that he will repay those who deserve it. You're like, well, isn't it normal to want to get revenge? And yeah, it's normal from our perspective. We think like, oh, it's so unfair that I don't get to like get even a little bit, that person doesn't have to pay. And think about this. Was it fair that Jesus had to die on the cross for your sin? Was it fair that Jesus had to pay the penalty that you deserve, death, for your sin? You know, we all want God to be fair with us, but we want God to be just with other people, right? We want justice for others, and we want grace for ourselves. But we can't, if we don't release this desire for revenge with people that have hurt us, we end up falling into this trap of bitterness. And bitterness leads to resentment. And those emotions are just so unhealthy for us. They impact us physically, literally physically. You go to the doctors, and doctors will tell you that bitterness and emotion can impact, make you depressed, make you be anxious. They can impact your physical body if we don't learn how to release bitterness and resentment through forgiveness. Look at what Hebrews says. Hebrews says, work at living in peace with everyone. Be careful that none of you fails to respond to the grace which God gives, for if he does, it can be very easily to spring up in him a bitter spirit, which is not only bad in itself, but can also poison the lives of many others. So if we can't learn how to live at peace, which happens through forgiveness, this unhealthy emotion of bitterness and resentment, it can pass. It says it right there. It can pass from generation to generation and impact the lives of others. And it just makes everybody miserable. I want to say this about real forgiveness. Real forgiveness is not conditional. If you say, I will forgive you if you do this, or I will forgive you when you do this, it's not forgiveness. That's bargaining. And, notice, Jesus didn't say, Father, forgive them if they ask forgiveness. Jesus said just, Father, forgive them. Genuine forgiveness is going to be unconditional. So that's step 1. I need to release my desire to get even. Step 2 is I need to reply to evil with good. Jesus said this in Luke chapter 6. He said, do good to those that hate you, bless those that curse you, and pray for those that mistreat you. There's 3 key concepts there. He says, do good to people, bless them, and pray for them, the people that mistreat you. You know that you have achieved genuine forgiveness when you can pray for God to bless someone who's hurt you. You can pray that God will bring them blessing. And it happens when we can learn to see life through the lenses of the person that have offended us. when we learn to forgive at this kind of level, it's not only that we're looking at our own hurt, but we start to see their hurt also. We've said this a lot, all of us pastors have said this. Hurting people hurt people. When we, hurt people. And when we can learn to see what is happening in the life of another person that's causing them to be offensive, causing them to lash out at us, it helps us to see life from their perspective, and it helps us to be able to be willing to pray that God would bless them, that God would help them, that God would heal them. And when we can pray for someone, we release it's that step of forgiveness that is going to help us release those feelings of bitterness and anger that we have when people wrong us. I think it's an important thing to mention that forgiveness is not resuming a relationship without changes. Forgiveness is not the same as restoring a relationship. It's part of the process to restoring a relationship, but it's not the same. Forgiveness is something that we can do instantly with someone, but trust is something that builds over a period of time when someone does something against us. Forgiveness is the part that we have to play in this reconciliation process, but that person who has offended us, they have some parts that they need to play. They need to demonstrate that they have a genuine repentance, which we can observe through a change in their behavior. And second, we need to see that happen over time so that we can rebuild trust with them. Like, for example, if you're in a relationship with an abusive spouse who's abusing you and your children, and they keep this abuse going on and on and on and on until you finally just say, I can't be here anymore, and you have to leave as, whoa, let there be light. And you have to leave from this abusive relationship. And then the person's like, oh, I'm so ashamed. I want you to forgive me. I need you to forgive me. You can forgive that person, but it doesn't mean the relationship is restored instantly. That trust is something that's going to take time to rebuild. That trust is going to take time to grow back. And that's normal and that's okay. But it's important for us to do our part when we've been offended to forgive in the relationship and start the reconciliation process that way. So we have step 1 to real forgiveness is I need to release my desire. Step 2, reply to evil with good. And step 3 is this. Repeat the process as long as it takes. Forgiveness is rarely a one-time event. There was a time when Peter was sitting talking with Jesus, and Peter says, Lord, on the topic of forgiveness, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? And Jesus said, no. 7 times 70. And what's going on here? So the point is this. In the Jewish law at the time when Peter asked this question, it was a law that you had to forgive someone 3 times. Basically, 3 strikes and you're out. And then you didn't have to forgive them anymore. So Peter thought, oh, well, I'm going to be extra gracious. I'm going to double that and add 1 for extra good measure. And surely Jesus will think, wow, Peter, you are amazing in your forgiveness level. But Peter's like, how many times do I really need to forgive someone, Jesus? What do you think about 7? And Jesus is like, no. To infinity and beyond. That's how often you need to forgive someone. And that's the whole point of the 7 times 70. People say that we should forgive and forget. And I don't think in relationship to this, idea of forgiving someone over and over. I really don't think that it's a biblical idea that forgiving includes forgetting. As a matter of fact, I think just the opposite. First of all, God gave us minds, God gave us memories, God gave us the ability to remember things. And there's nowhere in the Bible where you're going to see that it says that we need to forgive and forget. That's something that I don't know who came up with, that you forgive and forget. And I think the biblical concept that is taught, that God teaches, is way better than forgiving and forgetting. You're like, well, what would that be? What could be better than forgiving and forgetting? And I think it's this. It's remembering, but realizing that God can bring good even out of bad. Remembering, but realizing that God can bring good even out of bad. You can't thank God for something that you've forgotten. You can't thank God that even though this terrible thing happened, that you can see his hand working through it if you've forgotten about it. So I think the biblical idea, as a matter of fact, look at what Romans said. This is Paul talking to the people in Rome. He says this: we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God. Notice, it doesn't say God causes everything to be good. It doesn't say that, because there's a whole lot of bad in the world. It assumes that Paul assumes that there's going to be bad things that happen. But he says this: everything will work together for good. The key to forgiveness is not forgetting. The key to forgiveness is that we remember and we let it go. We remember and we trust that God is going to do what he said he's going to do, and he's going to bring us out of that circumstance. So these 3 steps to forgiveness. I think there are 3 things that you can't have deep level forgiveness without them. We release our desire to get even, we reply to evil with good, and we repeat the process as often as possible. I think the steps, they're simple, but extremely difficult to implement. The deepest level of love, though, cannot happen in our lives apart from our ability to learn how to forgive other people when they wrong us. In New Zealand, this may be a fun fact that you don't know. I didn't know it. New Zealand has the home, or is the home to the largest flightless birds of any other place on the planet. How many people knew that? As a matter of fact, 43% of the birds in New Zealand can't fly. And you're like, why would that be? Well, the reason is this. There's nothing to threaten the bird population. The birds in New Zealand have no predators, so there's no need for them to fly. So they have wings, but they never use them because there's nothing ever causing them to need to use their wings and fly. So the birds, they never reach their full potential because they never have the opposition of a predator coming at them. The same thing happens with us. We can never reach our full potential of loving other people deeply without the conflict that happens between relationships and us learning how to forgive people through that conflict. There's a lady who wrote her story of how she really learned these 3 principles of forgiveness. And I ran across this week, and I wanted to read to you part of it because she does a great way of just describing how she went from not being able to forgive to learning the depth of what forgiveness means and what God's forgiveness means. As a matter of fact, I think 2 things happens when we learn how to forgive. Not only do we reach the deepest level of of forgiveness, of the deepest level of love towards people, but we understand better the deep love that God had for us when he forgives us. So two things happen when we learn how to forgive deeply. We restore that relationship with other people, but we also understand God's forgiveness and God's love for us more. So here's this story I want to read for you a little bit. I want to share my story. This lady's name is Eloise. I want to share my story of how feeling completely accepted and forgiven by God has been the key to breakthrough from my lifelong pattern of perfectionism, self-righteousness, and trying to control everything and everyone around me. I grew up in a large blended family of 6 kids, she says. I learned pretty quickly that if I do the right thing, I got rewarded and approval. And I craved that feeling of reward and approval. For me, love was all about words. Tell me I did good. Tell me I'm smart. Tell me you're proud of me. That was my definition of love growing up. I was very active in church, leading worship, volunteering for building projects, mission trips, and bringing friends to church. My mission became to right all the wrongs in the world. In some ways, I felt that I was supposed to be a savior to the world. Because I'm a fighter by nature, I had to fight for something. So I began to fight for justice and truth. I was very critical of others, believing I had the right to be so because I was the good girl. I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink. I didn't have sex. I was the good kid with good grades. Inside, I felt people should be more like me, since that's what I was told by everyone. I graduated from high school and decided to attend a small Bible college. There, my passion for God, justice, and truth only grew, and I was accepted into an elite ministry training program. If there was a hierarchy of righteousness, it went something like this: God first, then Jesus, then me, then humanity. I was so close to perfect, it was sinful. In college, boys who liked me were not in short supply, but only one had caught my eye. It was the bad boy in the back of class who rode a bike around campus. I thought to myself, I will call him Bike Boy, and he will be mine. After only 6 months, Nate and I were dating. He showered me with compliments, treated me like a princess, a real gentleman, opening doors and paying for me. He even donated plasma in order to buy me roses. Well, we already just passed Valentine's Day, but that's not a bad idea if you're looking for next Valentine's Day. This was the type of sacrifice I was looking for, one who knew my true value and worshiped the ground I walked on. Nate joined the Marine Corps, and after boot camp, I was all in. Handsome, confident, and dressed in blues, I told him I couldn't live without him and started planning a wedding. I found pornographic magazines in my groom-to-be's barrack room before the wedding. It wouldn't be the last time. I made it very clear that I would not be okay with this kind of material in our marriage. We married in November of 2006. I moved to Georgia with my new husband. Our son was born in 2007, and shortly we moved to Camp Pendleton. On our trip, I caught my husband viewing an inappropriate movie, and I was mortified. This was when we had our first heart-to-heart about sexual addiction. He told me that he struggled with pornography, and I thought, okay, well, who doesn't struggle with something? He went on to say that it had been going on since before we met. What? This was when I realized he had an addiction. But I decided that at that moment that all I needed to do was love the sin right out of him. While my husband was deployed overseas, my father died from cancer. At church one Sunday, I decided to share my feelings with a kind lady. She spoke about Celebrate Recovery and how it would help me with my hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And I asked, isn't that for addicts? I told her kindly that's not what I was looking for, and I was actually offended that she would offer such a group to me. Me, I don't hurt. My habits are holy, and my only hang-up was Jesus, truth, and justice. So all I decided I needed was more church. A few months later, I grabbed a Celebrate Recovery codependent pamphlet, and there was one line I truly related to. It talked about how I may be unforgiving towards the addict and punishing the addict. That was me. My husband's many relapses meant that I shamed, blamed, guilted, manipulated, and tried to control his addiction in the name of love because he was unable to do so himself. I felt that it was my job to fix and manage his addictions because I was his God. I was a narcissist married to an addict until the day I learned about grace. I thought grace was portioned out according to the need. I thought I only needed a little grace, but my husband needed a lot of grace. What I learned at Celebrate Recovery was that God's grace for me was like a waterfall. I could barely stand underneath it because of its sheer weight. That amount of grace was able to wash even the most secret parts of me. I realized that rather than me being a savior, I needed a savior just as much as my husband did. That day, I saw myself with humanity, not above them. I realized that I'm not God. Then, August 21st, 2010, my husband sat me down and proceeded to tell me about an affair that he had had a year and a half prior. A flood of questions came to my mind, but I heard the Lord say, clear as day, not a word, Eloise. My husband returned from Afghanistan in May of 2011. From that time until July 2012, we went through 4 counselors, 3 relapses, and separated within the home. I needed sobriety, openness, and honesty from my husband, which he was unable to give me, so I moved out in July of 2012. Year 3 is where the miracle happened. It's where my paradigm shifted. Ezekiel 36 says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take from your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. This is what happened to me. In this season, God became so real and close to me. I felt abandoned and rejected, but God was closest in these times. It was one day at a time, one moment at a time, until my miracle. In February of 2013, I asked to have a conversation with my husband. I had to apologize for the things that needed apologies, and I opened my heart and validated his pain. Everything I said were things that I had said before, but not for a motive for myself any longer. I truly cared for his brokenness, and it grieved me that he was doing it all alone. The weeks that followed was one of true celebration. My separated husband and I spoke every day for a week, and we ended up at the end of the week exchanging rings and committing to moving forward together. We met with our counselor, not believing that we were cured, but knowing that there was still work to be done. In counseling, we discussed a game plan for me to move back in April of 2013. Everything has not been smooth sailing, but I see my husband now, and he matters to me. It's crazy to me, but I truly believe my husband's affair saved my life. Without the pain of betrayal, I do not believe for a moment that I would have taken the painful steps to grow and face the truth about myself. I've learned to accept the forgiveness and grace of God for myself, and I'm now able to offer the same grace and forgiveness to others. Isn't that amazing? Notice that her story wasn't short. Her story of forgiveness and restoration of that relationship with her husband, it took a while. And she had all those 3 steps that we talked about, she had to go through each one. And she went through them. And she was able to restore relationship to her husband and restore her relationship to God, which she didn't even think she needed to do. But I think that's all part of the process. The reality is this: we are all broken people. living on a broken planet. Jesus was traveling, when Jesus was walking the earth in his time in ministry, he would travel from city to city. And one day he was traveling to a city, and he had just gotten to the city. And I imagine this was common, like he would get into a new city, and people would be like, Jesus is here. Jesus is here. Let's go see him. Did you hear about this guy? He heals people. He heals people from all diseases. Well, so as soon as he got to the city, this story in Luke, it tells about how Jesus got there. And right away, some people helped a blind man come up to him. And the blind man was like, Jesus, would you heal her? Or the people were like, Jesus, can you help this man? And so Jesus, it says that he spit on the guy's eyes, and he said, can you see? And the guy is like, well, people kind of look like trees. And I was thinking about that. If I was being healed by Jesus and I was blind and I could see a little better, but it wasn't like 100% better, I think I would have maybe just been like, well, yeah, everything's good. This is way better than it was. But he didn't do that. He says, well, I can kind of see, but people, they just kind of look like trees. And it says that Jesus touched him again. And his eyes were opened, and he could see clearly. He could see clearly now. The rain was gone. And I think the point, it wasn't a botched miracle. I think the point of that experience was he wanted to know if that man would be real enough with Jesus to say, I'm not fixed yet. I need a second touch. I'm not fixed yet. I need a second touch. And that's my question for you this morning. You should have seen a little paper when you came when you sat in your chairs this morning. It says, I need a second touch from God. Are you willing to be real with God this morning and say, I'm not fixed yet. My relationships aren't fixed yet. I need a second touch from God. Or maybe it's a third or a fourth or a fifth touch from God. I need that second touch from God. You may be on either side of this forgiveness equation. You may be someone who's been offended. You may be someone who's been an offender. You may be both. Are you willing to make today be a turning point in your life where you say, I'm not fixed yet. I need a second touch from God. I need God to help me through this. I need God to help me with this relationship. It may take a while, but this could be the beginning of a new chapter in your life. Maybe you're in that chapter where you're working through it like that lady. She was a few years working through this chapter of learning what true love was, learning what true forgiveness is. 1 Peter says this about Jesus. 1 Peter 2:24. It's Jesus' close friend Peter that we were just talking about, and he wrote a couple books in the Bible. He says, Jesus personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we can be dead to sin and live for what is right. By his wounds, you are healed. He gives you the power to overcome and to restore these hurtful relationships in your life. So I want to try something today. Maybe this is a new chapter in your life. Maybe this is in the middle of a chapter and just a reminder to say, hey, God, I need that second touch, a third touch, fourth touch. I'm going to have Lauren come out here and sing a song of blessing and prayer for you. It's really a prayerful song that you would have the courage and strength to be able to trust Jesus in your circumstance. But what I want to do is something a little different, because I want you to put some feet to your situation. And you'll see, I was going to have you write down names, but instead of doing that, I just wrote down this little thing on here for you. I need a second touch from God. While she sings this song, if you would say, you know what, I need a second touch, I want you to come up. These I have on these little bowls with red water in them, representing Jesus' death, that he died on the cross for us, and the hope that we can have through him and the power that we can have through him. You put your paper in there, and you just touch that paper with a nail, and you're going to see that conflict disappear. And it's a simple little reminder, but I think it'll be an experience that'll help you remember that no matter what your circumstance is, you can trust Jesus to help bring you through it. It may not be in a day, it may be a few years, but that conflict, when you can learn how to forgive and trust God, your conflict was going to go away, and it's going to be restored with Jesus. So while Lauren sings this song, just come forward. Put that paper in here as a reminder that Jesus will bring you through this circumstance.